calling me back.
Is It Because I'm Black by Syl Johnson. Here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. We're broadcasting on over 1,000 stations, on Pacifica and NPR stations, public access and PBS TV stations, and both TV satellite networks. Dish Network, Channel 9415, Free Speech TV, 9410 Link TV, Direct TV, Channel 375 and 348. And we're video and audio podcasting at democracynow.org. Our headlines are also available in Spanish for any radio station to take as over 300 are. On this eve of Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday, a federal holiday, the last two states to acknowledge it were New Hampshire and Arizona. We are having a discussion about the state of Black America. Michelle Alexander has written extensively about the mass incarceration and the age of colorblindness, and we want to talk about what that means in terms of voting. People died for the right to vote in the United States. And yet today, what happens to people who are imprisoned? Just a figure. Human Rights Watch says African-American adults have been arrested at a rate of 2.8 to 5.5 times higher than white adults in every year from 1980 to 2007. Yet African-Americans and whites have similar rates of illicit drug use and dealing. And then how that plays out right to deciding who will vote for these laws.
Well, absolutely. You know, felon disenfranchisement laws have now accomplished what poll taxes and literacy tests, you know, ultimately could not. People in the United States are stripped of the right to vote in many states if they have a felony conviction, including a minor drug conviction can, you know, wind up labeling you as a felon for life. And when people are released from prison, they can be stripped of the right to vote for a period of years, or in, you know, a few states for the rest of your life. And I find that many people kind of shrug their shoulders at that when I, you know, remark on the fact that so many people are denied the right to vote because of criminal convictions. But in other Western democracies, people who are in prison have the right to vote. But here we deny the right to vote not only if you're in prison, but once you're released. I think it may be 2 states you're allowed. One of them is Vermont, where you can vote in prison. Yes, absolutely. But we just don't seem to take democracy as seriously here in the United States, particularly if you're poor and of color.
And this whole emphasis in recent years on by many police departments on quality of life arrests and stop and frisks. So New York City, for instance, 600,000 people stopped and frisked by police, with 90% of them Black and Hispanic. And increasingly the militarization of the schools, arresting students in schools, police departments actually functioning within the schools. The impact on the underside of the building of this Jim Crow system at that level, at the street level and at the school level.
Yes, you know, that is the engine of mass incarceration, is the stream of people who are fed into the system through these kinds of aggressive policing tactics like stop and frisk. And, you know, think about that. You know, in 1 year alone, 2010, more than 600,000 people were stopped and frisked in the city of New York. And in less than 15% of those cases, was there any kind of suspect description involved? The overwhelming majority of those stops and frisks were police stopping, frisking people on their way to school, on their way to work, on their way to church. And inevitably, people are fed into the criminal justice system in that fashion and labeled criminals or felons for engaging in extremely minor nonviolent offenses. Drug use and sales is about as common in middle-class white communities and college campuses as it is in the hood, but it's poor folks of color who are doing time for these kinds of offenses.
Michelle Alexander, you've talked about the war on drugs as a counter-revolution against the civil rights movement.
Yes, absolutely. You know, numerous historians and political scientists have documented now that the war on drugs was part of a grand Republican Party strategy known as the Southern Strategy of using racially coded touted get tough political appeals on issues of crime and welfare in order to appeal to poor and working class white voters who were resentful of, anxious about, fearful of many of the gains of African Americans in the civil rights movement. And, you know, to be fair, I think we have to acknowledge that poor and working class whites really had their world rocked by the civil rights movement. You know, wealthy whites could continue to give their kids all of the advantages that wealth has to offer, but it was poor and working class whites who were faced with a social demotion and whose kids might be bused across town to go to schools inferior. And affirmative action programs created the sense that, you know, black folks were now leapfrogging over them on their way to, you know, Harvard or Yale or fancy jobs in corporate America. And this state of affairs created an enormous amount of anxiety, fear, and resentment, but it also created an enormous political opportunity. Pollsters and political strategists found that these thinly veiled promises to get tough on a group of people, not so subtly defined by race, could be enormously successful in persuading poor and working class whites to defect from the Democratic New Deal coalition and join the Republican Party in droves. So the war on drugs was really an effort by the Reagan administration to make good on campaign promises, to get tough on a group of people defined largely by race.
I want to ask you and then Randall Robinson about solutions informed by your research and your life. Movements. We see the Occupy movement today and how it has shaken this country. And now even the Republicans are going at each other for the kind of capitalism that they practice. The Republican presidential hopefuls, Rick Perry calling Romney a vulture capitalist. What movement do you think needs to take place now?
Well, there absolutely has to be a movement. Nothing less than a major social movement has any hope of ending mass incarceration in America or inspiring a recommitment to King's dream. You know, if we were to return to the rates of incarceration we had in the 1970s, before the war on drugs and the Get Tough movement kicked off, we would have to release 4 out of 5 people who are in prison today. You know, 1 million people employed by the criminal justice system would lose their jobs. So this system isn't going to just fade away without a major social upheaval, a fairly radical shift in our public consciousness. So my view is that this has got to be a human rights movement. It's got to be a movement for education, not incarceration, for jobs, not jails, a movement that acknowledges the basic humanity and dignity of all people, no matter who you are or what you have done, so that we don't view it as normal and natural to strip people of basic civil and human rights following their release from prison.
Randall Robinson, talking about movements. You spearheaded the anti-apartheid movement in this country, getting arrested numerous times, among other places, in front of the South African embassy. You fasted almost unto the death to stop the, to fight the U.S. government, President Clinton, I think, at the time, to allow Haitians to come into this country at the time of the bloody coup of 1991 to 1994 in Haiti. Talk about the power of movements and what you see from your perspective now living in St. Kitts, having quit America, the name of one of your books, what you think needs to happen in this country.
Just 12% of the people who commit nonviolent drug infractions are black. I think 56% of those, nonetheless, who are prosecuted, and something on the order of 75% of those who are imprisoned. I mean, we can see the striking unfairness of it. But we have to find a way to get that information to people. Outrage has to be informed by information to go anywhere. South Africa worked because everybody knew about the apartheid system when we went to jail. And so it was instant. This is a little bit more difficult. I mean, we're backward in the world in so many ways. We find ourselves in bed with China, Iran, and 2 or 3 other nations in our embrace of the death penalty, when the rest of the world is moving in the other direction. But 75% of those executed are black and Hispanic. And so the unfairness of it is seen in the statistics of who pays and who doesn't. We get sentences twice as long for commission of the same crime. It's just fundamentally unfair. And the question, Amy, is how we can put this together in a way that is consumable and inspiring to people, to let them know that this is not just a black or racial issue. It's an issue for all Americans who care about democracy and equity and fair play and decency. And that's what we have to do. We're killing our own country's future, is what we're doing. And we're killing genius in jail cells that does not have a chance to blossom and to flower.
And you've written some amazing books in terms of impacting on social policy. Your book on the debt that the United States owes to Black America. But now you've moved more into fiction. Your sense of the role of fiction and of creative writers in helping to shape the consciousness and understanding of reality by readers. And
I read a lot of fiction. I read both fiction and nonfiction, but there's some people who read only fiction. And I think you can write meaningful fiction for people who would be concerned about the kinds of issues that we're discussing here today. And nonfiction is not as multi-layered as fiction is. Fiction not only conveys information, but it conveys other dimensions of the human personality and the capacity to care and think and to puzzle out problems.
We have to leave it there. I thank you so much both for being with us. Randall Robinson will be speaking tonight at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture in Harlem from 6 to 8. Randall Robinson's latest book is a novel. It's called Makeda. The latest book of Michelle Alexander, just out in paperback, The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness. If you'd like a copy of today's show, you can go to our website at democracynow.org. We have a Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. special on Monday. Stay tuned. Democracy Now! Has 2 immediate openings. One is for a full-time systems administrator with 5 years Linux experience at least. The other is for a Rails developer to maintain our website, democracynow.org. Go there for information. Democracy Now! Produced by Mike Burke, Renee Feltzer, and Mate Nermeen Sheikha, Mimi Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Thanks so much for joining.